Hello, everyone. I'm ready for history. Tuesday, March 24th. We're going to start talking about Chester A. Arthur today. Before we do, let's sing our president song and try to remember what we've already learned. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk and Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant and Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush and Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Donald Trump. Okay, now we're ready to start. We talked yesterday about Garfield, and Garfield was elected as president. He was only president for 200 days. So, in the same year, 1881, Chester A. Arthur becomes vice president. And he is sworn in his home in New York City. And he is pretty much shocked. He was not expecting this. He has kind of ridden what's called the spoils system the whole way. He has um, just been the person that people have put in because they knew they could get their person in. And he is not really what anyone would call a leader. And so this is shocking to him. I don't think he expected this at all. This is shocking to the United States, and the country is kind of wringing their hands, going, oh my goodness, we have Arthur in the White House. What are we going to do? And the pretty cool thing, the surprising thing, is that this is someone who was very little expected out of when he came into the presidency and shocked everybody when he went out. And the shock was that he rose to the task. It was kind of amazing. And I think historians have just kind of marveled like, what happened? What happened to him? Why? Why does all of a sudden seem like a change go about? Did he realize that now he was president and he was going to step up to the plate and he was going to take his job seriously? And no one really knows what happened. I did hear, this is coming to mind now, a story, and I would like to look more into it. And if I do, I'll let you know. There was a lady, and I forget her name, and she wasn't really anybody, like anybody really important, that wrote to Arthur a few times and basically said, this is your time. You need to step up. This is your calling. This is what you're to do. We need you to be strong. We're all scared. Garfield has been killed. This is your time. And he even visited her once. Now, she was kind of a homebody, and I think I read she hardly even wanted to come out and meet him. But he even came and spoke to her, and they exchanged a couple of letters. And the idea was, you know, and kind of history is like, was it her? Was it these letters that kind of inspired him to say there are people depending on you, so it's time to step up to the plate? Don't know. It's kind of interesting. I'll let you know if that just kind of came to mind. I had forgotten about that. I'll see if I can do some more research and figure out what that was. Okay, here we go. We've got our papers out. You've probably already written this down. Chester A. Arthur, number 21, 1881 to 1885. So it looks like a full term, but we know the truth, right? He was the vice president. This was someone who was never elected as president. Republican. Vice president, none. Why? Because he was the vice president, and at that time there was no law filling that if they were taking the job as president. There was nothing that was going to fill that in. And then a nickname for him is Elegant Arthur. I don't know if you can tell from his picture, but this was a very elegant man. Another word for the time might be to say he was dapper. He liked the clothes that he wore. He liked keeping himself he was very put together. That was something that was important to him. He had very nice things. He had very expensive taste. He cared about what he wore and where he went and the things that he owned. They always had the nicest of things in their home. Their home was decorated very well. By the way, I looked up their home, and his home that was most of his adult life is in New York City, privately owned, and it looks like the only part that's open is the bottom, the first floor, because it's just a tall brownstone building. And it looks like, if the picture on National Park Service is right, it looks like the first floor is a deli. And they just have a little plaque on the building, I think, that says home of President Chester A. Arthur. So, not much of a museum. They have reconstructed his birthplace in Vermont, but it's not much of anything to see either. So, there's not a whole lot of places to go for this one, for this president. Okay, now, First Lady. Now, we say First Lady, but there's a little disclaimer here. She died before he was president. So, was she technically the First Lady? No, she never technically was. She was the wife of, I guess we would say she was the wife of a future president, but she was never First Lady. Her name was Ellen Nell, people called her Nell, Herndon Arthur. And I read one place where he said that he called her his little rebel wife because she was from the South. She was born and raised in Virginia. She had a lovely singing voice. Several things that were written about her, not a whole lot, but what I have seen has mentioned just how beautiful her voice was. And she sang in church. Her father was a sea captain, and he very tragically died at sea when she was a young adult, right before they were married. And then she had, didn't include all of this, but she did have a baby that they named after her father, but he died when he was 2, and then she had another son and then a daughter, and that did live. And she was, part of her tragedy is that she died very quickly and young. She was only about 42 at the time, and she had been out at a benefit, I think a type of a concert, and she was out and she was caught in the rain, and she got a cold, which turned to pneumonia, and by the time Arthur got to her side, she was already unconscious. And she died a short time after that, and he was heartbroken. Absolutely heartbroken. He was, this was before he became vice president, she died a little less than a year before he became vice president. So she never saw him become vice president or president. And he said, one of his quotes is that honor or titles mean very little to me now. And it was basically the now is after my wife has died. That was what was important, and now she's gone. A couple of things that I thought are really cool about a way that he honored her as he continued to live. He left her the seat where the First Lady would have sat, where his wife would have sat during dinners at the White House. He left open. At official White House dinners, no one sat in that seat. That was Nell's seat, even though she wasn't there and never even entered the White House. I think that was really neat. And then this picture that I put at the top, see this little picture frame? This is the picture that he kept. I'm not sure where it was, but he kept with him, and supposedly every day he placed fresh flowers next to this framed picture. So there's a couple ways that he was honoring her even after she died. I think that's kind of neat. In a way, he took her memory with him to the White House. Now, because he didn't have anyone to fulfill that official kind of First Lady hostess job. Now, one, he was kind of a host himself. He liked to play host. He liked that. He liked to entertain. That was something he wouldn't have any problem with, telling you where to put the silver and what kind of this you wanted and what he liked that. But he did ask his sister to come and not just help with some of the hostess jobs, but also to help raise his daughter. He had a young daughter when he went to the White House. His son was away at boarding school, and his daughter was about 8, and he just needed help. He needed help with her. And so his sister, Mary McElroy, would be who we would call the First Lady, even though that's not his wife. Remember, sometimes the term First Lady is just the one that acts in that position. And this is her picture here. She had her own children. She had 4 of her own children, but she came and did stay. I don't think stayed continuously, but did stay some with him and help with raise his daughter. And then I put on here what I said a minute ago, that he was social and elegant and liked to do a lot of the hosting himself. So he didn't necessarily need a lot of help from Mary, but during that time, there was a role that she was filling. Remember, I've said before that if a woman wasn't present at a dinner party or an event, then other women weren't then allowed or invited to come. And so there needed to be that presence, even though he may want to do all of that job himself and tell where to put this and where to put that, and that's fine, but she needed to be there for social reasons. Times have kind of changed a little bit, but that was still important. I can see that changing in this time. In the 1880s, it's slowly we're working towards changing that, but not much so far. Okay. Now, his personal. His dad was a Baptist minister. He served at several different churches. He was born in Vermont, and I went to Vermont a couple summers ago. It is absolutely beautiful. It's West Virginia up a notch. West Virginia is beautiful, the hills and the trees, and I mean, it's just green everywhere you look. But Vermont is like that double. I don't know what it was. It just seemed, it was beautiful. And so he liked the outdoors. He loved fishing, specifically salmon fishing. I didn't put this on here, but when he was president, I think it was said that his working hours were from about 10 to 4. And he would often be fishing or doing other leisurely activities. We see that of several of these presidents during this kind of we have this kind of short time of these presidents that we see as kind of inactive, kind of sitting back, only, doing certain things, but not really being hyperactive. And he's one of those. His first political job was at 15, working for Henry Clay. So if you remember Henry Clay, he's in a book that I have that it talks about. Almost President is the title of the book. Henry Clay tried many, many, many times to become president, but it just wasn't meant to be. He was a very important political figure, though, had a lot of influence. Arthur did go on to study law. I don't think he was a particularly wonderful student, but he finished. He quickly became well known as a New York lawyer. His dad was, I put up there that he was a Baptist minister, but he was also an abolitionist. He was strongly, strongly, strongly against slavery. And Arthur would have been born before the Civil War. He also served in the Civil War. I didn't include that. I should have. He did serve in the Civil War. And so he was against slavery. And he served in a couple of cases for people who were standing up to injustice. And one of those is a lady named Elizabeth Jennings, who was forced out of a streetcar in New York because she was a young black lady and she was on her way to church and no one was going to stop her and she needed to get to church, and the man told her to get out and she didn't, and he drug her out and they took him to court, and they won. And they actually got public transportation desegregated in New York at the time. So I think that's kind of neat. We forget that that was being fought in the 1880s, that that battle was being fought. We remember it more modernly in the 1960s, where we see people like Rosa Parks, um, who was arrested for keeping her seat in a bus in the South. Well, people were fighting that for 100 years before. And Elizabeth Jennings is one of these ladies, and she was a young lady at the time, who stood up, and her family supported her, and they took the city of New York, or the state of New York, to court and won. And Chester Arthur was the one that represented her, and I think that's something neat to know about him. Okay, he was hired to the New York Custom House by Grant. That was a pretty influential job. That was an important job, probably not very hard to do, probably not a lot of really hard work, but it was very influential. And he hired a bunch of people that maybe weren't necessary for the job, but were important in their government, in their political beliefs. And so that's what the spoils system is about, is that they are putting people in position, in high positions, that can have influence in the government for their party. So, oh, you need a job? I want to make sure I get a Republican in this job, so you come in here. And then I've got all of this stacked with Republicans. Okay, that's the spoil system, that you really only have your place because of what party you're in, not because you're good at it. Okay, are you good at this job? Are you going to do this well? Are you honest? Remember John Quincy Adams, who hated parties, who didn't vote according to party? He voted according to what he believed. Well, the spoil system is the opposite. And there were people who thought that there was a place for that. Okay, so you get lots of people here who will vote for us. Then we'll get the things passed that we want to get passed. But when you have a system like that, what happens is you have what I talked about briefly before, the bosses rise up. Because the bosses are the ones getting all of these people so that they can get the votes they need. So the people under them aren't necessarily the thinkers. They're the ones that are just going to vote yes with the boss. So the boss is the one controlling, pulling the strings and saying, oh, we want this guy here, we want this guy here, we want this guy here, we want this guy here. Now, we're passing a bill calling all Republicans. Okay, and then they will vote for him because the boss says to vote, and he got them their job. And he can say, you still want your job? Well, then you vote with us. Do you see? So that's how the spoil system worked to get legislation moved to what they wanted because they had so much control. So he was hired by Grant for this kind of high kind of do nothing position, and then fired by Hayes. So Hayes came in. Remember, I told you Hayes wanted to clean up some of this spoil system. So one of the things he does to kind of prove a point, and to Roscoe Conkling, who was a friend of Arthur and kind of his buddy. And remember, Roscoe Conkling was the guy I told you about that was kind of in an argument with Garfield. And even when Garfield was alive and Arthur was his vice president, Arthur was seen siding with Conkling even when he and Garfield were having these arguments. And Arthur was still going to parties at Conkling's house, hanging out with him, going to dinner with him. This was his like best buddy. So he was in tight with Roscoe Conkling. Now you can understand why when Arthur became president, everyone went, oh no. And Conkling went, yes. Because what did he think? He thought, I'm president, right? Basically, this is my boy and he's going to do what I say. So, yes. Now, what's pretty cool about Arthur, I think, is he doesn't do that. He shocks everybody. And he changes like in a day. And he passes some bills that clean up this spoil system that he was a result of. Absolutely amazing. Still don't know. This proves to me that God holds the hand of the king. God is in charge. If God wants to turn someone this way or that way, I think this is kind of proof of that. I think that God must have intervened in some way, because everyone just kind of stands baffled. What? What? Why? How? Um, so, okay, so Arthur comes into the White House. He looks around and he goes, ugh, this place is a dump. And I mean, think about all of the time that it had existed. It's been around at this point for about 100 years. It's crumbling, it's falling down, it hasn't gotten care, and it needs some serious help. But Arthur wanted to like demolish the whole thing and start over. He had plans drawn up. He was like, I think it should look this way. And then they were going to have kind of offices in one building and a separate residence. And let's just kind of fix this place up because I am not living here. Congress had different view. They were like, nope, cannot tear down the White House. It's too historical. We'll renovate it. And every president does have a budget for renovations. And I've been studying more on this year on just the changes in the White House itself. With each president, the White House changes. In staff, it changes in appearance. You might get this wing added, this one added, this wallpaper put up, this put up. Everyone has a budget in order to do some renovations and some changes. They might add a golf course. They might add Teddy Roosevelt added a tennis court. So you have different things being added. At one point, there's greenhouses put on the lawn. So it's just kind of growing and changing according to the president. But he wanted to just tear it down. Congress said no, but they gave him a budget to renovate. And he hired Louis Tiffany, who I don't know if you know of, if you've ever been in New York and you're walking down the really, really fancy streets and it's the Tiffany stores. It's your major jewelry. This lamp at the top is a Tiffany lamp. If you've ever seen those like stained glassy lamps, that's what they're called. Tiffany lamps, and he was the one to do that. And you see this picture in the bottom is showing the men in the White House when they were renovating it, and you see a whole wall of stained glass that Louis Tiffany did himself. And he was the best designer, most expensive in the country, and Arthur hires him. He's who I want to do the renovations and the redecorations at the White House. So Arthur doesn't even move in until it's done because he's not, I'm serious, he's not living there. And then they clean out all of this stuff that had just kind of accumulated in the White House. Well, but think about this. Think about what's accumulating. The historical things that presidents had owned. Pants or hats that belonged to Lincoln. There was something that belonged to John Quincy Adams. They were being auctioned off, just hauled off in bags. Let's just take it off. We need to clean this place out. I'm not living in here. And then all of that historical stuff was just being taken out. That's why you see in the future, you do see some presidents and their wives coming in very interested in the historical value and wanting to restore some of that to the White House. What was this room used for when Lincoln was here? What was this room used for? Arthur doesn't really care about that. He cares about style, and that's what he sets off to do. Okay. He was the first president to have a valet. So this would be like a personal assistant to help him in his getting dressed and, his daily needs. He had new plumbing with his renovation put in the White House and an elevator. A fun fact about him kind of goes along with what we've already talked about. He was known to have owned 80 pairs of pants. Now I want you to think about this. This is not the time of washing machines. Okay, now we can wear several changes of clothes in a day and it's really not a big deal because we just throw them in the washing machine and they're ready in a few hours. This was not that time. There were people, many, many, many people who had one or maybe two changes of clothes at this time, like a Sunday best and then their normal everyday clothes. But Arthur has 80 pairs of pants and he changes them several times during the day according to whatever need may arise. So his dinner pants or his lunch pants or whatever. I just think that's kind of a fun fact. Two sites that I want to tell you about that I found this week. OurWhiteHouse.org is actually based off of a book that I own, and it is stories of the White House. But what they have done is they have each president, and they have the facts, they have events during his presidency, they have quotes from the president, and it's very well done. This little cartoon guy is actually from that site. And then another one, periodic, no, I spelled this wrong. This should be periodic presidents. Now, this was really neat. I found this today, and this was they have taken the information of the presidents and put them in lots of infographics. Infographics are just like those charts that show you different information in kind of picture or boxy type ways, and they have lots of different ones talking about the presidents. And so I thought that was kind of neat. That's one to check out too. I hope you're enjoying searching your own book. I hope you're keeping up with us. And below, keep telling me that you're watching. Keep listing things that I might forget, things that are mentioned in your book, things that I'm passing over or not mentioning that you want to share with everyone else.